Tonight on Primetime Politics, a call for collaboration.
And I think it's an obligation of leadership to seek to know more than to know less.
In the wake of the NSICOP report on foreign interference, Elizabeth May is calling on party leaders, asking them to come together to formulate an action plan and stop the dueling press conferences. Coming up, we will speak with the Green Party leader. Also, wrapping up the spring session. As MPs get ready to leave Ottawa, we'll talk to polls analyst Éric Grenier about the task each party leader needs to accomplish during the summer break. And the Israeli Prime Minister dissolves his war cabinet. We'll examine the impact that decision will have on the war in Gaza. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Serapio. The woman who heads the public inquiry into foreign interference weighed in today on the NSICOP report. Commissioner Marie-Josée Augue saying her inquiry will follow up on findings that allege certain members of Parliament may have helped foreign actors. Augue stating in part, the Commission will conduct this examination as part of its ongoing work under Clause C of its current terms of reference. It should be noted that the Commission has access to all of the documents reviewed by the NSICOP and on which it based its conclusions. Now, that announcement comes just hours after the Green Party leader Elizabeth May held another news conference on the matter, trying to clear up the disconnect between her and her NDP counterpart after both she and Jagmeet Singh read the full and unredacted report last week. Well, with more on the NSICOP report, we're now joined by the Green Party leader Elizabeth May. Ms. May, good to see you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Michael.
Listen, I think it's fair to say that Canadians are left scratching their heads, wondering how you and Mr. Singh could have come out with such different conclusions. But you say that really the conclusions aren't vastly different. Can you explain that?
No. Well, I mean, I think it's a tone of voice. There's a difference in tone of voice. Mr. Singh said, I'm more upset now than I was before. And I said, I'm really relieved. Okay, so what was on my mind when I started reading the report? Are there MPs currently serving in Parliament who could be described as having taken action against Canada that borders on treason or that might be actually treason? I read the full unredacted report and I'm relieved. Now, I don't know what Mr. Singh had on his mind when he went in to read the report. He came out and said, I'm more upset than I was before. So that's a very subjective commentary, and I can't say in any way that that's a contradiction. I am not saying that there's no concern about foreign interference. On the contrary, I'm saying we need to act urgently to deal with an increasing problem of foreign governments interfering in Canadian affairs, undermining our democracy. Buttressing our democracy through action is where I want to put our attention as parliamentarians. Mm-hmm. That means that I think we should quell what I, having read the report, think is unproductive and not justified by the intelligence effort to try to get out the names of people who might be traitors, because reading the report, current members of Parliament don't fit that at all. There's one example, as I've said before, of a former member of Parliament where I want an investigation, and I think if the intelligence holds up as evidence, there should be a prosecution. But that's one unique case and doesn't apply to current members of Parliament at all.
Does not apply to current members, but Mr. Singh did use the word traitor. That's such a strong conclusion than the one you reached.
Well, they clarified from his office, and I think this is really important. I think the clarification from the NDP leader's office didn't receive as much media attention as perhaps a misinterpretation of what he was saying. His clarification from his office was that he was not at all confirming or suggesting or denying that there are current members of Parliament who, to whom he was referring with the word traitors. So we agree that there was at least, and I see evidence of only one former parliamentarian that I would consider did things that were the actions of a traitor. Again, if intelligence isn't evidence, and we always have to give a benefit of the doubt in any, and also the presumption of innocence is deeply ingrained in our systems of justice in this country. That said, I don't think Mr. Singh said anything differently than what I said, except in terms of tone of voice and emphasis emotionally, not on the facts.
You know, Mr. Singh did also, though, criticize the Prime Minister for not acting sooner. In fact, he said the Prime Minister has concluded that foreign interference is acceptable at some level. Do you draw the same conclusion?
No, and I think the question should go to the Prime Minister or back to Mr. Singh on that one. I don't agree with that conclusion, and there's larger context here that you get when you read the whole report. The committee does say they wish the Prime Minister's office had acted more quickly on their recommendations. I can agree with the committee. On the other hand, when you read the whole context, as a Prime Minister is receiving different reports from different agencies that report to the Prime Minister, including our Foreign Diplomatic Service and their Global Affairs Canada, who have a different set of considerations and a different lens on what diplomats can do overseas, because our diplomats have to be able to act in foreign capitals and interact with other societies to advance Canada's interests. So there's a lot to be considered here, and I'm trying to keep to a place, believe it or not, as leader of a federal political party, I want to try to stay nonpartisan on this issue so we can unite and have a collaborative effort to give a very clear message to foreign governments that you can't interfere in Canadian democracy. Tighten up our rules, tighten up the way we act as members of Parliament, and also look at the rules at provincial capitals and in municipal elections. All aspects of society need to take the threat of foreign interference very seriously and take action against it.
Okay, I hear your call here to be more collaborative, but you know, Mr. Poilievre still has not signed the documents necessary in order to get access to the unredacted report. What do you make of that?
Well, I note that keeping nonpartisan, I was surprised that Tom Mulcair, as former leader of the NDP, supports Mr. Poilievre in this, and that no leader should read the report, says Mr. Mulcair. I don't understand that, but I think all of us as elected people will do a better job with more information rather than less information. But I leave that to Mr. Poilievre to explain. I remain in hope that like Mr. Blanchet, who initially said he wouldn't seek top secret security clearance and then did, I hope Mr. Poilievre will change his mind and obtain it as well.
Do you think NSICOP should have released this report in a different way? Because at this point we have more questions than answers, because the reaction, first you, then Mr. Singh, has led to questions. Should this have been handled differently, do you think?
Well, I think the reaction, let's start with the reaction before I read it, before Mr. Singh read it, which was that for national media reading the public available report, there were enough details that appeared to suggest that maybe, just maybe, there were parliamentarians who had violated our oath of office and swearing allegiance to Canada. I hope that by reading the report and sharing with Canadians my conviction based on the knowledge and the context of being able to read the full unredacted report, that members of Parliament who are prepared to work for other governments instead of Canada share information that is contrary to Canada's national interest, those people are not serving with me in Parliament. I'm very relieved, and I want to share that with Canadians. So how the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians disclosed their work is up to them. I have nothing but respect and admiration for the Herculean job they did in going through 33,000 pages of top secret information and trying to share with Canadians that we do have a problem in Canada, that foreign governments are increasingly targeting our society, our elections, our internal nomination processes, our leadership races. Not only that, targeting journalists, political staffers, community organizations. I think all of Canadian society needs to realize the world has shifted quite a bit to where we can realize that governments, whether the People's Republic of China or India, are actually interested in our domestic affairs and interfere and want to interfere in them. And that's something we can all take, and we all should take very seriously. And our job as parliamentarians is to act to protect our democracy.
So where does it go from here then, Ms. May? In an ideal world, if you could dictate where it goes, because there seems to be two levels here. One is the reaction to the report from political leaders, and two is the foreign interference itself. So where do you want to see this go?
I want to see us have, and in the words of the chair of the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, David McGuinty, he said, look, we should have the opportunity to have an adult conversation. That starts with, as far as I'm concerned, the work the committee did is extraordinary. All of them as parliamentarians, both House of Commons members of Parliament and senators from almost every party. The Greens weren't invited on the committee, but that's not a criticism. I'm just saying they've got the Bloc, the Conservatives, the Liberals, New Democrats, and independent senators, members of Parliament, together on a committee, capable of writing a report to Canadians with a public version and then a more secret version with more intelligence in it that is accessible to MPs, party leaders who seek top secret security clearance. That's impressive. That's a lot of work. I want to work with that committee. I want to accept the notion, which I'm also putting forward, and I'll be codifying. I haven't written it down. I've said it in a couple press conferences. And I really ought to write a letter to all my colleagues who are leaders of the other federal political parties and say, please, get your top secret security clearance. Let's all have read the report, because dueling press conferences aren't going to help sort this out. If we could sit down together in a secure location where we didn't risk divulging any of the material that we read that's top secret, I think we could come up with an action plan to protect Canada's democracy from foreign interference. The committee has already made a number of recommendations. We need to, I think, work together and set partisanship aside, put Canada first, and give Canadians an assurance that we are acting to push back on foreign interference in Canada.
Elizabeth May, I appreciate the time. Thank you for this.
Thank you very much, Michael.
Well, today marks the start of the last sitting week of the current spring session for Parliament. If all goes to schedule, MPs should be returning to their home ridings as early as Friday night. But Conservatives are calling on MPs to stay and keep working, with the Conservative House Leader Andrew Scheer turning to X to say the following, quote, crime, record food bank use, and a housing crisis. Conservatives want Parliament to work over the summer to help fix Trudeau's problems. Will the NDP work with us, or will they join Trudeau on his vacation? Well, regardless of when Parliament rises, when it does, each party leader has work to do this summer. And to talk about that, we are joined right now by polls analyst Éric Grenier. He is the man behind the Writ. Hello to you, Éric.
Hello.
Listen, I thought it would be interesting to get your analysis, because you have seen the numbers and you do go beyond the top line. So with that in mind, let's begin with Pierre Poilievre. He and his party have been leading in the polls since Parliament came back in the fall, a roughly 20-point lead at this point over the Liberals. What does he need to do this summer to keep that momentum, that lead going?
I think that's the question. It's about keeping, because the polls that we've seen over the last little while have suggested that the Conservatives have hit their ceiling, that somewhere in the low to mid 40s is about as high as they're going to go, because we haven't seen much of an increase in their support over the last few months. Of course, being ahead by 15 to 20 points is not a bad place to be, but I think for Pierre Poilievre, the challenge will be whether he can keep that support. The longer he is in the limelight as the heir apparent to Justin Trudeau in terms of becoming the next prime minister, the more of a focus there will be on him. So the longer that he can keep the focus instead on Justin Trudeau, who remains very unpopular, the longer the Conservatives will be able to keep this lead. If they're still up by 15, 20 points when we're talking this time next year, that's going to be a really good position for the Conservatives. It is going to be a challenge to keep that lead for as long as that. Probably not so much over the summer. Usually we don't see the polls move too much over the summer, but we would have said that before last summer when the Conservatives moved ahead for the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you did mention the Prime Minister, and I do wonder about Justin Trudeau. What does he need to do? Where does he have to get it done, be that geographically or demographically, to try to do a catch-up here?
I think the biggest challenge for the Liberals is that there really isn't one demographic group that they're doing particularly well in, not one region where their support has remained all that strong. The polls that we've seen in Ontario and Quebec, where of course most of the Liberal caucus is, still not very good, that they're trailing the Bloc Québécois in Quebec. Sometimes they're in third place behind even the Conservatives in that province. And in Ontario, we haven't seen any positive momentum for the Liberals on that score. So for Justin Trudeau, he has to hope that something is going to move the dial. We have seen some indication that maybe in some polls the Liberals have hit their floor. If the Conservatives have hit the ceiling, the Liberals have hit their floor. But we sometimes do see a poll now and then, like we did from Abacus just over this past weekend, where the Liberals hit a new low. So I think that for the Liberals, it is going to be a very challenging summer. All of the indicators are going against them in terms of Justin Trudeau's own support, polling on whether there's a desire for a change of government. If the Liberals can come out of the summer a few points up from where they are right now, that is going to be a victory for them, because right now wins are hard to find for the party. Yeah,
wins are hard to find. But the Prime Minister just gave another interview where he seems once again determined to fight another election. But a lot of people are wondering, would the Liberals do better under a different leader?
That is really the biggest question that really no one has the answer to. There has been some polls that would indicate that maybe under the Liberals, under a different leader, there could be a bit of an improvement in the Liberal score, but really nothing significant. None of the leaders that we see bandied about in terms of their potential to take over from Justin Trudeau really improve the Liberal score all that much. But it's hard to make the argument that the Liberals can do a lot worse, because right now, that in some of the polls we've seen, they're only a few points up on Michael Ignatieff's performance in the 2011 election. So if there are Liberals who are wondering whether a change would give them a better chance in the next election, the answer could be no, it might not give them a better chance. But right now, their chances are so low that the gamble might be worth taking. If we had had this conversation last year at this time, we wouldn't have said that the Liberals would probably be better off with a new leader. Now, we can say that even if it was a 50-50 chance it might improve things for the Liberals, it doesn't seem like they have a 50-50 chance that things will improve on their own.
Okay, well, we might get an early indication in the St. Paul by-election. This is in the city of Toronto. That by-election is next Monday. The Liberals carried that riding with just under 50% of the vote in 2021. It's been Liberal for decades, but the party now seems quite worried about what is traditionally considered a safe seat for them. Just how justified are those concerns?
I think that they are pretty justified. If the Liberals do lose this seat, it would be a historic upset for them because they've held it for so long. The Conservatives haven't been able to win in Toronto over the last 3 federal elections. So for the Liberals to lose a single seat in Toronto, something they haven't done under Justin Trudeau in this by-election, that would be a big deal. If you're looking at the swing in the polls that we've seen in Ontario, the Conservatives have gained enough and the Liberals have lost enough that the margin, that 24-ish point margin that Carolyn Bennett won in Toronto St. Paul's in the last federal election, could be overtaken just by that swing in the polls. Now, by-election is always going to be a little bit more concentrated in terms of the trend line. Maybe there will be turnout effects that some people will go out that will boost one party over another. But when you're looking at the kind of numbers we've seen, it is a possibility that the Liberals could lose Toronto St. Paul's. If you look at the Durham by-election that took place just earlier this year, the Liberals underperformed their own expectations. So I wouldn't, if I was a Liberal betting on the red team in Toronto St. Paul's, I wouldn't put a lot of money on it.
Any predictions?
It'll be a long night. That is the only prediction I'll make because that ballot is over 80 names long, which means it's going to take a long time for voters to vote, a long time for counters to count. And if it ends up being close, it just means that the tension and the drama will be all the more prolonged on election night.
Éric Grenier, always appreciated. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Well, time now for a look at what happened in politics today. Green Party leader Elizabeth May was back in front of the cameras discussing the NSICOP report. Last week, May said she was vastly relieved after reading the report, but that is a very different conclusion than the one reached by the NDP leader who said he was alarmed. The Green leader says she does not believe their conclusions are so far apart, but she wants the dueling press conferences to end. She is inviting all leaders to come together to discuss the NSICOP findings and to formulate an action plan.
Get your top secret security clearance. Let's all have read the report because dueling press conferences aren't going to help sort this out. If we could sit down together in a secure location where we didn't risk divulging any of the material that we read that's top secret, I think we could come up with an action plan to protect Canada's democracy from foreign interference. The committee has already made a number of recommendations. We need to, I think, work together and set partisanship aside, put Canada first, and give Canadians an assurance that we are acting to push back on foreign interference in Canada.
The Defense Minister Bill Blair answered questions this morning about a Canadian Navy ship anchored in Cuba. Over the weekend, Conservatives condemned the move, questioning why the government would allow a Canadian vessel to dock at the same port as a flotilla of Russian Navy vessels. But Blair says a Canadian ship in the port of Havana was meant to send a message of deterrence.
The deployment of these ships and aircraft sends a very clear message that Canada has a capable and deployable military, and we will not hesitate to do what is required to protect our national interests. Canada will and is committed to maintaining a credible military presence in the sea and in the air around our continent. And any foreign actors coming into our neighborhood can expect to see our armed forces fulfilling their mission to protect Canada's interests. The Canadian Armed Forces will continue to track the movements and activities of the Russian ships. Presence is part of deterrence.
To Israel now, where Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced the dissolution of his war cabinet last night. The move comes after the resignation of Benny Gantz and Gadi Eisenkot. Both are moderates and former leaders of the Israeli Defense Forces, and both left the war cabinet, criticizing Netanyahu's handling of the war in Gaza. Mr. Netanyahu says without the war cabinet, decisions about the Gaza offensive will now be made by his pre-existing security cabinet and the larger cabinet attached to his coalition government in the Knesset. Well, for more on this, we're now joined by Janice Stein, the Belzberg Professor of Conflict Management at the University of Toronto's Department of Political Science. Janice, always good to see you. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure, Michael.
So listen, let's begin here with the dissolution of this war cabinet, because it does follow the departure of two moderate members of that body. Why did those members leave?
Well, the two members that you're talking about, Michael, one, Benny Gantz, a leader of the largest opposition party, a centrist right party, and the other, Gadi Eisenkot. Both of them, by the way, were former chiefs of the defense staff. And Gantz left primarily over what he describes as the absence of strategy on the part of Netanyahu. And this has been a consistent complaint for the last 3 or 4 months. No military wins without a strategy. And Netanyahu is a known procrastinator, an improviser who, because he is hostage to a far-right coalition in the country, will not talk about the day after the fighting ends. And that's the principal objection that both Benny Gantz and Gadi Eisenkot have had, that there is no plan for the day after. And if you think you might have heard that before, Michael, you've heard it from Tony Blinken and the Biden administration as well.
So a wide shared concern then. So what impact will the dissolution of this cabinet, this war cabinet, have on the operations in Gaza?
There's no question that, and that was the reason that Benny Gantz went in, that was to create a small cabinet of decision makers, 3 at the political level, 1 diplomat, and Gadi Eisenkot at the military level, to take decision-making about the war out of the hands of the right-wing coalition. Now, they stepped back, the regular cabinet, the security cabinet, which is a subset of the broader political cabinet, but they frankly didn't step back far enough. And Netanyahu was held hostage to their decisions. Once these two are gone, the war cabinet serves no function. Decision-making is going back to the coalition, which will, in fact, empower the most right-wing voices in Israel on security decisions. There's no question about it.
So as you say, Netanyahu very much beholden to the coalition that keeps him in power in the Knesset. They are more right-wing, less centrist, more right-wing than other partners. So if that affects the war, what type of pressure then does Netanyahu face amongst the Israeli public, amongst Israeli voters? Just how popular is he right now and his policies?
Well, there's no question that this is the moment of greatest domestic pressure on Netanyahu throughout his whole career. And why is that, Michael? Because the families of hostages, which are a powerful political movement inside Israel, are pulling back into the streets now. Larger and larger numbers of Israelis who are saying the priority here must be the rescue of hostages, even if that means a permanent end to the war for now, if you get clever use of terms here. Mm-hmm. Stop this war now, agree to Hamas's terms fundamentally, although not the phasing. And the first order of priority has to be to bring back the hostages. Now, that position is widely supported in Israel. What is not widely supported in Israel is any resolution of this conflict which will leave Hamas in control of Gaza. Since the beginning of this war, Netanyahu's popularity has dropped. It has actually begun to recover a little bit, especially after the successful defense against Iranian missiles. But he still would lose his majority in the Knesset were an election to be held today. Benny Gantz would lead the largest party.
Mm-hmm. So right now, the current Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, essentially without his moderate allies in that war cabinet, facing criticism, facing a call to get the hostages out of Gaza, as well as beholden to essentially a more right-wing coalition in the Knesset. What are you watching out for then? There's so many threads to this in terms of where it might go.
There are. I'm really watching two things, and they're two quite separate threads, although they're connected. The first is we are, regardless of what government is in power right now, we are coming to the end of the high-intensity phase of conflict in Gaza. Frankly, this removes the last of the organized battalions, and we are transitioning out of the high-violence phase, out of the high-intensity phase, to what I expect, in the absence of any political strategy, to be an insurgency by Hamas. Which will take place at a much lower level of violence, but there will be continued fighting. In the north, where Hezbollah has made it clear that they will not cease the rocket fire until there is a formal ceasefire in Gaza, that fire has been escalating across that northern border. President Biden now has an envoy at Hochschild who is in the region on an urgent basis to try to get both parties to pull back. But I am watching that northern frontier with some apprehension.
Janice, I always appreciate the insight and the expertise. Thank you for this.
My pleasure, Michael.
And that is our program for this Monday. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Primetime Politics is back tomorrow evening. Until then, take care.